1978. A man loads the boot of his car with trolley jacks and sets off to find buyers. No factory, no warehouse, no staff. Only a surname, Sealey, and a hunch that Britain's mechanics deserved better tools at a fairer price. Today, that surname hangs above one of Britain's largest tool empires. Vast warehouses in Suffolk, a catalogue that reaches workshops around the world, a fortune grown from the back of a single car. But here is the strange part. Walk into almost any garage in Britain, and you will find the name Jack Sealey stamped on the steel. Jack Sealey built none of it. Jack Sealey signed nothing. Jack Sealey was never born at all. So who was he? How does a man peddling jacks from his car boot raise an empire under the name of someone who never drew a single breath? Bury St. Edmunds, Suffolk, from one car boot in 1978 to the present day. This is the story of how an invented name built something entirely real. The name on the paperwork was real enough. John Sealey, a Suffolk man with no factory of his own, no production line, no workshop bearing his name. What he had in 1978 was a car and an idea about a single, unglamorous piece of equipment, the trolley jack. It is the most ordinary object in any garage. A low steel frame on casters, a hydraulic ram, a long handle. Mechanics across Britain use them every day to lift the dead weight of a motor car. Nobody romanticized them. Nobody built legends around them. And that, perhaps, was the opportunity. The motor trade of the late 1970s was vast, fragmented, and hungry. Thousands of independent garages and repair shops, each needing reliable, affordable kit, and few suppliers willing to chase their custom one workshop at a time. So John Sealey chased it himself. He loaded trolley jacks into the boot of his car and went looking for buyers. There was no showroom, no catalogue, no telephone order line. There was a man, a vehicle, and a product he believed in. Calling on garages, opening the boot, taking the order, and driving on to the next. It was selling at its most elemental. Face-to-face, handshake done, onto the next town. Slowly, it worked. One satisfied garage led to another. The orders grew heavier than a single car boot could carry. And as the customer base widened, John Sealey did what every successful peddler eventually must. He came in off the road. He took premises he could trade from, somewhere to hold stock, somewhere a customer could ring. The man with the car boot had become a business. That business took its founder's home county as its base, Bury St. Edmunds in Suffolk, a quiet market town better known for its abbey ruins and its brewing than for industry. It was here, not in the great manufacturing cities of the Midlands or the North, that the foundations were laid. The company records its birth as 1978, the year the trading truly began, though the legal entity behind it had been registered a little earlier, in the autumn of 1977. A business, like a person, is not always born on the day its papers are signed. And then there is the matter of the name. For decades, professionals up and down the country have bought tools stamped with two words, Jack Sealey. It reads like a founder's signature, a proud surname paired with a sturdy, dependable first name. Customers pictured him easily enough, Jack Sealey, the no-nonsense Suffolk toolman, whose name you could trust. There was only one problem. Jack Sealey never existed. There was no Jack. The man behind the company was John, and Jack was never a person at all. The name was a quiet piece of cleverness, a compound stitched together from two things, the founder's surname, Sealey, and the very object that had carried him off the road and into business, the jack. The trolley jack that had filled his car boot gave the company half its name. The brand that would one day appear in workshops far beyond Britain was, in truth, a man's surname bolted to a tool. It was honest about its origins in a way few brand names ever are. The product had made the man. The man's name would keep the product's story alive. Every Jack sold was a small monument to where it had all begun. But a clever name does not build an empire. A car boot full of stock does not, on its own, become one of the largest tool operations in the country. Between the man on the road in 1978 and the modern business that would carry his invented name far beyond Britain's shores lay something much harder to pull off than a good pun. It lay in a single, stubborn decision about how to sell. A decision most of his rivals got wrong, and one that would shape everything that followed. Most men who succeed selling from a car boot make the same next move. They open a shop. They put their name above a door, fill the window with stock, and wait for the public to walk in. It is the obvious path. And John Sealey did not take it. Instead, he made a quieter, stranger bet, and he held to it for the rest of the company's life. He decided that Sealey would not, in the main, sell to the public at all. It would sell to the people who sold to the public. This is the world of the motor factor and the trade dealer. The local supplier from whom a working garage buys its spanners, its jacks, and its consumables, often on account, often by the day. Rather than competing with those dealers for the end customer, Sealey chose to supply them. The company would become the backbone behind the counter, the wholesaler that kept thousands of independent shops stocked so that the man who actually fixed your car never had to wonder where his tools had come from. It was a long game and a humble one. There is no glamour in being the name behind the name, but it carried a powerful logic. Every dealer Sealey signed became a permanent shop window the company never had to pay rent on. Every garage that trusted its local factor quietly inherited that trust in the Sealey brand on the shelf. Loyalty compounded. A single good relationship with a factor could mean decades of repeat orders. And while flashier rivals chased the public through high street shops and, later, the great retail sheds, Sealey wove itself into the plumbing of the British trade. The decades that followed are, frustratingly, the least documented stretch of the company's life. Sealey was a private, family-owned firm with no shareholders to court and no obligation to broadcast its progress. And so, the precise dates, the year the catalogue first needed more than a single page, the year the staff first outgrew a single room, have largely gone unrecorded in public. What is clear is the shape of the journey, even where the calendar is blank. The company outgrew its first premises and then outgrew the next. The single product, the trolley jack, multiplied into a range. Hand tools, then power tools, then the heavy equipment of the modern workshop, jacks and stands, and cranes and benches. Each new category demanded more space, more stock, more people. And step by step, the operation gathered itself onto a single site on the edge of Bury St Edmunds, Kempson Way on the Suffolk Business Park, where it remains to this day, having spread across the ground there piece by piece as the business swelled. But the most revealing part of Sealey's rise is not the buildings, it is the people inside them. And one career in particular tells the story better than any balance sheet. A young man named Mark Sweetman left school and joined Sealey as a warehouse worker. He picked stock. He learned the floor. And over the years that followed, he climbed, rung by rung, through the body of the company until he reached the very top, taking the role of managing director. He had not arrived with a degree and a strategy deck. He had arrived with a job in the warehouse and never left. By the time he ran the place, he understood it not from the boardroom down, but from the loading bay up. And he still knew many of the people on that floor by name, because not so long before, he had been one of them. That was no accident. It was the culture John Sealey's company had built. The conviction that every person had a part to play, that the man driving a forklift mattered to the machine as much as the man signing the checks. In an industry that increasingly treated workers as line items, Sealey ran on a kind of family familiarity. Fitting, perhaps, for a firm that has stayed family-owned from the boot of that first car right through to the present day. The long game had paid off. The contrarian bet on dealers, the patient stacking of one relationship upon another, the refusal to chase the obvious money. It had all compounded decade after decade into something that no longer resembled a man and a car at all. To grasp just how far it had traveled, you have to step inside the operation as it stands today and confront the sheer, almost disorientating scale of what a boot full of trolley jacks became. Drive to the edge of Bury St Edmunds today, onto the Suffolk Business Park, and the thing that strikes you first is not a sign or a logo. It is the size. Sealey's headquarters now sprawls across more than 500,000 square feet, an expanse of warehousing and service buildings so large that staff move between them by vehicle, with further ground still being developed for expansion. It is, by any measure, an industrial campus, and every inch of it exists to do one thing: move tools. Consider the catalogue. The company that began with a single product, the trolley jack, now lists more than 12,000 separate product lines, a range so broad that its printed catalogue runs to well over 1,000 pages and is reissued with hundreds of new products every year. Hand tools and power tools, jacks and engine cranes, diagnostic kit and body shop gear, storage, lighting, agricultural and marine equipment. If a workshop in Britain needs it, Sealey almost certainly stocks it. The numbers behind that range are extraordinary. For a firm that began in a car boot, at his 40th anniversary, around 2018, Sealey was turning over some £67 million a year. In the years that followed, that figure pushed towards £100 million, with more recent measures placing annual revenue in the region of £90 million. Precise current figures are best treated with caution. Privately held, companies report sparingly, and second-hand sources disagree. But the direction of travel is unmistakable, upward and steeply. To feed that trade, the building holds an enormous reserve. At any given moment, stock worth tens of millions of pounds sits waiting on the racks. A deliberate strategy, because Sealey's dealers increasingly rely on the supplier to hold inventory so that they need not. And the reach of it all extends far beyond Britain. Sealey today exports to more than 70 countries, its red-branded tools turning up in workshops on the far side of the world, a long way from a Suffolk market town. Behind the racks stand the people, more than 400 of them, Team Sealey, making the company one of the larger employers in its corner of Suffolk. They staff the call centre, the warehouse, the technical desks, and, increasingly, a dedicated service operation that sets Sealey apart from a simple box shifter. That service arm is a machine within the machine. Down the road from the main warehouse sits a service centre stocked with some 130,000 different spare parts. Not units, but distinct references, backing a total inventory that runs into millions of individual components. The promise attached to all of it is exacting. The company aims to dispatch at least 99% of its entire range within 24 hours. Tools break. The trade waits for no one. And a mechanic with a dead machine needs the part today, not next week. Making good on that promise demands serious hardware of its own. A fleet of forklifts hauls the heavy stock. An automated picking system tracks the smaller references in and out, holding availability high and error low. It is logistics, not craft. The art of having the right object in the right van at the right hour, repeated thousands of times a day. Stand in the middle of it, and the scale turns almost abstract. 500,000 square feet, 12,000 lines, 70 countries, 90 million pounds. It is a very long way from a man knocking on garage doors with a boot full of jack. And yet the whole vast apparatus is still recognizably doing what he did, getting the right tool into the hands of the person who needs it and being trusted to do so. But numbers, however large, are a still photograph. They tell you how big the machine is. They cannot tell you what it feels like to stand inside it while it is running at full tilt, when the phones never stop, the forklifts never settle, and an entire day's promises must be kept before the lorries pull away. To understand that, you have to be there for a single, ordinary day. It begins, as it always has, before most of Britain is awake. In the dark of a Suffolk morning, the lights come up across the Kempson Way site, and the great sheds shrug off the night. Out on the road, the first inbound deliveries are already running. On the racks, yesterday's late orders are already staged for the vans. The building does not so much open as resume, because the promise it makes runs on the clock, and the clock never truly stops. By the time the first calls are due, the warehouse is already in motion. Forklifts nose between the aisles, lifting the heavy stock that no single pair of hands could shift. The cranes, the cabinets, the pallets of jacks. For the smaller items, there is a quieter, cleverer choreography. The automated picking system, tracking each reference in and out, directing human hands to the right shelf in the right order so that nothing is hunted for and nothing is lost. It is a strange kind of theatre, half muscle, half algorithm, and it plays to an empty house every morning for no audience at all. Then the lines open, and the day's true character announces itself. Above all else, this is a day of voices. For all the automation in the sheds, Sealey's beating heart is a room full of people answering telephones. The trade does not send an email and wait. The trade rings. A factor needs a dozen of something before lunch. A garage has a machine down and a customer's car stranded on the ramp. A dealer 2 counties away wants to know this very minute whether a part is sitting on the shelf. The calls arrive in a near constant stream, the better part of 2,000 across a single day. And the standard the company holds itself to borders on the absurd. Answer within 3 seconds. No hold music as a matter of policy. No recorded apology about high call volumes. A human voice, and a fast one. Because the person on the other end has a customer of their own waiting, and time is the one thing a working garage can never get back. It is a small courtesy, repeated thousands of times a day, and it is also a strategy. In a trade built on the next job and the next deadline, the supplier who picks up first is the supplier who keeps the account. There is a texture to the place that no catalogue could ever capture. People know one another here. A query slides from the sales desk to the technical team sitting deliberately next door, close by design, so that an answer is never more than a few steps away. A voice calls a question across the floor, and another voice answers it by name. The man on the forklift and the woman on the phones are not strangers passing in a vast machine. They are, in the company's own telling, a team. And the word is not entirely marketing. It is the same familiar culture that once let a warehouse picker rise in time to run the entire firm, and it still hums underneath an ordinary working morning. But courtesy and culture only start the day. What the day demands before it is over is delivery, in the most literal sense of the word. As the morning tips into afternoon, the building enters its tensest hours. Every order taken on the phones must now become a physical thing. found, gathered, boxed, loaded, and it must happen before the lorries leave. This is the part of the day that the customer never sees and never thinks about. The silent race against a deadline that arrives without fail every single afternoon. The forklifts move faster now, threading the aisles with the heavy goods. The picking system pulses through its lists. Trolleys fill, labels print, pallets rise. What began as a voice on a telephone an hour ago is becoming a parcel with a name on it and a county to reach. There is no room for the comfortable lie that it'll go tomorrow. The whole point of Sealey, the reason a dealer trusts it with his shelves, is that it does not say tomorrow. It says today. And so the building bends itself, hour by hour, towards the moment the doors roll up and the vehicles are loaded, because a promise to dispatch is only worth anything if it is kept while the day still holds. Off to one side runs the part of the operation that quietly separates Sealey from a firm that merely shifts boxes. In the service center, the day has a different rhythm, slower, more forensic. Here, tools come back. Something has failed. Something needs a part. Something a mechanic depends on has stopped working in the middle of a job that pays his wages. The engineers work to a standard the company is fiercely proud of, a turnaround measured not in weeks, as the customer fears, but in hours. The aim being to have the items serviced or repaired and heading home inside 2 days. Behind them wait the shelves of spare parts, references stretching off into the distance, kept precisely so that the answer to "can you fix it?" is almost always yes. It is an unglamorous promise, but for the man whose livelihood is the broken machine on the bench, it is the whole relationship. And then, in the late afternoon, the deadline simply arrives. The lorries are loaded, the doors come down. Somewhere in the building, the day's orders have been turned, in their overwhelming majority, into parcels, already moving out across the country. And what could not go today has been logged, chased, and lined up to lead the charge tomorrow. The phones quieten, the forklifts settle. The lights that came up in the dark will, in a few hours, go down again, and the great sheds will hold their breath until the cycle begins once more. What is most striking about the day is how unremarkable it is. There was no triumph in it, no disaster, no moment anyone will remember. It will happen again tomorrow, and the day after, and 10,000 times beyond that. The same voices answered fast, the same race won against the same clock, the same broken tools mended and sent home. The whole towering apparatus, half a campus and half an algorithm, exists to keep one small and very old promise: get the right tool to the person who needs it and be trusted to do it. It is almost exactly what a man once did from the boot of his car, only multiplied beyond anything he could have pictured on those first lonely drives between garages. And yet a harder question hangs over every tool that leaves the building, no matter how flawlessly it is sent. Moving a product perfectly is one thing. The product itself is quite another. How good, in truth, are the tools that carry the invented name? Where does Sealey really stand among the brands a professional might reach for? And what do the people who use them every day actually make of what they find in the box? That is where the story stops being a celebration and starts becoming an argument. Every trade has its hierarchy, and the tool trade is no exception. Ask a room of mechanics which brand they trust, and a ladder quickly takes shape. At the very top sit the elite professional names, Snap-on chief among them. The markers a working technician treats almost as heirlooms. Their tools cost eye-watering sums, sold from vans that come to the workshop, and they are bought with a single expectation: that they will outlast the person using them. As the trade saying goes, the price is silly. but they are built to last. That is the summit of the market, and Sealey has never pretended to occupy it. Sealey lives instead on the rung, where most of Britain's real work actually gets done. The broad, crowded, fiercely competitive middle ground of value tools. It is the same territory contested by names every British tradesman knows. Draper, with its long heritage. Clark, with its workshop machinery. The own brand expert and professional ranges that fill the catalogues. These are the brands that arm the ordinary garage, the serious hobbyist, the small workshop that cannot justify a snap-on bill but needs kit that works. And in that arena, Sealey is not a bit player. With its distinctive red branding and a catalogue that seems to cover everything, it is one of the dominant forces. But here the picture grows more honest and more interesting. Sealey is not one quality of tool, it is many. Spend time among the people who actually use the kit, and a consistent verdict emerges. The upper ranges, Sealey's premier line, and its professional-grade equipment, earn real respect. Sockets, spanners, and the better automotive gear are widely judged as sound, sensible tools for the money. Drop down the price list, though, and the reviews cool sharply. The budget lines and cheaper sub-brands draw the kind of scorn the trade reserves for tools that disappoint. The lights, the bargain kits, the lowest cost odds and ends that some mechanics dismiss outright. It is, in the end, the oldest law of the workshop. You get what you pay for, and Sealey sells across the whole span of what you might choose to pay. The sharpest distinction the trade draws is between the user and the use. For the home enthusiast, the weekend mechanic, the DIY restorer, the consensus is forgiving. Sealey tools are, for occasional work, perfectly good value. For the full-time professional leaning on the same tool every hour of every day, the cheaper lines can wear out fast, and the canny buyer learns to be selective. To know which Sealey products punch above their price and which to leave on the shelf. The brand rewards the customer who picks and chooses. It punishes the one who assumes every item in a vast catalogue is equally good. And yet to judge Sealey purely tool by tool is to miss what it is actually selling. Its genius was never to make the single finest spanner in the world. Its genius was the whole package. A colossal range under one familiar name, at prices the ordinary trade can afford, available almost instantly, backed by a service operation few rivals can match. A professional does not buy from Sealey because each item is the best ever forged. He buys because 9 times out of 10, Sealey has it. It is good enough for the job, the price is fair, and it will arrive before he needs it. In a trade run on margins and deadlines, that combination is worth more than perfection. This is the quiet truth at the heart of the company's success. And it leads directly to the most uncomfortable question of all. If Sealey's strength lies not in forging the best tool, but in supplying the right one, then a natural question follows, one the company's proudly British image does not invite. Who actually makes the tools that carry the invented name? And in what sense, exactly, is this celebrated British brand a British toolmaker at all? Pick up almost any Sealey tool, turn it over, and read the small print. More often than not, it will tell you something the bold red branding does not. Made in China or Taiwan. Almost anywhere, in fact, except the Suffolk town, whose name the company wears with such pride. This is the paradox at the centre of the whole enterprise. Sealey is a celebrated British brand. Sealey is not, in any meaningful sense, a British manufacturer. For many customers, that comes as a quiet shock. A heritage name, decades of trading, a proudly Suffolk headquarters. It all whispers the same comforting story. British tools, made by British hands. But the steel is not forged in Bury St. Edmunds. The overwhelming majority of Sealey's products are made overseas, chiefly in the great workshops of China and Taiwan, and shipped to England to be branded, stocked, and sold. A handful of more specialist items may come from elsewhere, but the pattern is clear. The tools are born thousands of miles from the name on the box. To the brand's harshest critics, this collapses the whole proposition. Strip away the red livery, they argue, and Sealey is little more than a wholesaler, a company that buys generic products made by other people's factories and gets its own name stamped on them before sale. By that reading, there is nothing uniquely Sealey about a Sealey tool at all. It is a Far Eastern product wearing an English coat. The same blunt charge is leveled across forums and workshops alike. They don't make anything. They just badge it. It is a fair criticism to put on the table. It is also, on its own, an unfair place to leave the argument. Because the uncomfortable truth is that this is simply how the modern tool trade works. Nearly all of it. Sealey's rivals do exactly the same. Draper sources globally. So does Clark. Even respected names follow the pattern. Teng tools, for instance, are designed in Sweden and manufactured in Taiwan. The world that John Sealey's company grew up in, a Britain that forged its own spanners in its own cities, had largely vanished by the time the company reached its peak. To single Sealey out as uniquely guilty is to miss that it is merely fluent in the only language the industry still speaks. And there is more to the British half of the story than a sticker. What Sealey genuinely does on home soil is not nothing. It designs and specifies much of its range, deciding what gets made and to what standard. It runs quality control and testing procedures on its products at its UK facility before they reach a customer. Checks, the company says, are independently audited. It holds the vast stock, answers the calls, services the tools, and stands behind them. And it does all of this with a workforce of hundreds, in a corner of Suffolk where such employers are not easily replaced. The forging may happen abroad. A great deal of the thinking, checking, and caring happens at home. So which is it? A proud British toolmaker or a clever importer with a memorable name? The honest answer is that Sealey never actually claimed to be the former. It has always described itself, plainly, as a supplier and distributor of tools, not as a forge. The deception, such as it is, was never really the company's. It lives in the customer's imagination, in the warm assumptions a British name and a heritage story invite. Sealey simply declined to correct a flattering misreading, as almost any brand would. But there is a sting in this paradox that goes far beyond image, and it is the part that should worry the company most. A true manufacturer controls its own destiny. It owns the factory, the furnace, the skill. A brand that designs at home but builds on the other side of the planet controls almost none of that. Its entire existence hangs on a supply line stretching halfway around the globe. A line that, for most of Sealey's life, ran quietly and cheaply in the background. That line was about to become the most dangerous thing about the whole business. Follow that supply line out of the Suffolk warehouse, and it does not stop at the county border. It runs to the coast, out across the North Sea, down through the world's shipping lanes, and onto the factories of the Far East. Almost everything Sealey sells must travel that whole distance before it can earn a penny. And a business built on a thread that long is only ever as strong as the thread. Begin with the choke point. Sealey's headquarters sits, by deliberate design, barely an hour from the port of Felixstowe, Britain's largest container port, the gateway through which a vast share of the nation's imported goods arrives. It is a brilliant location when the system works. Stock can move from ship to shelf with remarkable speed. But it also means the company's lifeblood flows through a single great valve. whatever happens at Felixstowe happens to Sealey. And in recent years, a great deal has happened. When the global shipping system convulsed, as it did dramatically in the early 2020s, every importer in Britain felt the floor tilt. Container prices soared many times over. Vessels waited offshore for berths. Ports, Felixstowe among them, choked on congestion as boxes piled up faster than they could be cleared. For a company whose entire model depends on having the right tool in stock today, a supply line that suddenly takes weeks longer and costs many times more is not an inconvenience. It is an existential squeeze. A true manufacturer could keep its own furnaces lit through the storm. An importer can only wait for its ship to come in. Literally. Then came the politics. The long-running trade war between the West and China turned the simple act of buying from a Chinese factory into a geopolitical gamble. Tariffs rose, rules shifted. The cheap, frictionless sourcing that had underwritten the whole industry for decades began to look fragile and contested. For a brand that exports to dozens of countries, the danger cuts both ways. Walls thrown up around its export markets are as threatening as costs piled onto its imports. A company that does not own a single factory has no way to vote in those distant decisions. It can only absorb them. There is a further, quieter threat, and it is the cruel price of success. A trusted brand sourced from the world's counterfeiting capital is a standing target. Where there is a respected red label and a healthy margin, there will be someone willing to copy it. Fakes wearing Sealey's livery, sold to customers who believe they are buying the real thing, each one chipping at the reputation the company spent 4 decades building. Policing that, across borders and online marketplaces, is a war without end. And closer to home, Britain rewrote its own trading rules. Brexit added customs friction, paperwork, and cost to the movement of goods in and out of the country. Another layer of grit in a machine that depends, above all else, on things arriving on time. Put it together, and the structural weakness is plain. Strip away the proud Suffolk address, and Sealey is, at its core, a company that buys low far away and sells reliably close to home. That model made its fortune. It also left it exposed at every link in a chain it does not own. The factory it does not run, the ship it does not sail, the port it does not control, the tariff it cannot veto, the forger it cannot catch. For most of the company's life, all of that ran quietly in the background. Then, almost at once, much of it stopped being quiet. Here, by every rule of business, is where the story should turn dark, where the squeeze becomes a crisis, the crisis becomes a collapse, and another proud British name joins the long list of the fallen. Except that it didn't. Through the shocks and the squeezes, the company kept growing, which leaves only one question worth asking. How? What had this glorified importer built, beyond a clever name and a fast warehouse, that let it survive a decade that should, by rights, have broken it? The answer is that, somewhere along the way, Sealey stopped competing on the one thing that should have destroyed it. An importer who competes only on price is doomed, eventually, to lose. There is always a cheaper container, a hungrier rival, a faceless seller on a marketplace offering the very same Far Eastern product for a few pounds less. Price is a race to the bottom, and the bottom is a brutal place to live. Sealey's survival rests on a simple, hard-won realization. It could not win that race, so it refused to run it. Instead, it built a moat and filled it with everything a cut-price competitor cannot easily copy. The first and deepest stretch of that moat is what happens after the sale. Anyone can ship a box. Far fewer can stand behind it for a lifetime. Sealey backs much of its hand tool range with a guarantee that runs not for a year or two, but for the working life of the tool. A promise that the faceless seller of an identical item simply cannot make, because there will be no one there to honor it. And when a more complex tool fails, the company does not shrug and point to the receipt. It mends it fast through a dedicated service operation built for exactly that purpose. A cheap rival sells you a tool and vanishes. Sealey sells you a relationship that survives the tool breaking. For a tradesman whose livelihood depends on his kit, that difference is not a detail. It is the whole decision. The second stretch of the moat is loyalty. The patient, unglamorous bet John Sealey made at the very beginning, to serve the dealers and the factors rather than chase the public, had quietly hardened over decades into something no shock could easily wash away. Thousands of trade relationships, many of them generations deep, do not evaporate because a container was late or a tariff rose. When the storms came, that loyalty was a keel. Customers who had trusted Sealey for 30 years did not abandon it for a stranger over a single difficult season. The third stretch is perhaps the most underrated of all. Who owns the place? Sealey remained, through everything, a family business. No outside shareholders to satisfy. No city analyst demanding a better number every 3 months. That freedom is a strategic weapon. A listed rival, squeezed by a bad year, must cut to protect the share price. A family firm can choose instead to absorb the pain, hold its stock when others slash theirs, keep its people, and take the long view. Precisely the patience that built the company in the first place, now redeployed to defend it. And the company did not merely defend. It invested in climbing the very ladder its critics said it had never stepped onto. In recent years, Sealey set out to build a dedicated product development center, a statement of intent that it wishes to be more than an importer of other people's designs, that it means to conceive and engineer its own products, to move from the company that badges tools towards the company that creates them. It is, in part, an answer to the oldest charge against it. Behind that ambition, a new generation of the Sealey family has begun to step forward into the business, suggesting that the firm intends to outlive its founder's invented name by many years yet. Stand back, and the pattern is clear. Everything that could be copied, the tool, the price, the Far Eastern factory, Sealey treated as the least important part of the business. Everything that could not be copied quickly, the lifetime promise, the service bench, the decades of trust, the patience of family ownership, and now the will to design rather than merely buy. It made the heart of the thing. The genius was never the spanner. It was the moat around the spanner, which is why a company that, on paper, looks dangerously fragile has proved, in practice, remarkably hard to kill. And it leaves us with one last question. Not about Sealey at all, but about us, and about what we now mean when we speak of a great British maker of things. For most of this series, the story has run the other way. We have walked through the ruins of Sheffield's great cutlers and the Midlands' proud toolmakers, firms that forged their own steel, employed their own craftsmen, and stamped their own names on blades and braces that lasted lifetimes. They were makers in the fullest sense of the word, and most of them are gone, undercut, outpaced, and finally overwhelmed by a world that could produce the same thing more cheaply somewhere else. Now consider Sealey. It forged nothing. It inherited no centuries-old workshop, mastered no ancient craft, and never poured a single ingot of British steel. By the romantic measure of those fallen giants, it is barely a tool maker at all. And yet, while the real makers fell, the company that made nothing not only survived, it grew into one of the largest tool suppliers in the country, still standing, still growing, still owned by the family whose surname it wears. That is the uncomfortable lesson at the heart of this story. Sealey endured precisely because it never tied its fate to the thing that killed the others. It did not depend on the survival of British manufacturing, because it never truly relied on British manufacturing in the first place. Where the proud forges staked everything on making and lost, Sealey staked everything on serving and won. It is not a comfortable moral, but it is an honest one. And it points to something true about the world we now live in. When the product itself can be copied by anyone, anywhere, for less, the thing that endures is never the product. It is everything wrapped around it: the trust, the guarantee, the voice that answers at once, the relationship that outlives the sale. Sealey understood, perhaps without ever quite saying so, that in a commoditized age, you do not win by owning the furnace. You win by owning the customer's confidence. The metal was always replaceable, the faith was not. Which returns us, in the end, to the name above the door. Jack Sealey was an invention. A surname bolted to a trolley jack, a person who never drew breath. For decades, customers placed their trust in a man who did not exist. And here is the strange, almost beautiful truth of it. It did not matter, because every promise kept in that invented name made the invention more real. Every tool delivered on time, every broken machine mended, every guarantee honored a decade on. Each one breathed substance into a fiction, until the fiction hardened into an institution. Jack Sealey was never born, but through 40-odd years of kept promises, he became real anyway. A man once loaded the boot of his car with trolley jacks and went looking for buyers. He had no factory and no fortune, only a surname, a hunch, and a clever little pun. From that, with patience and stubbornness and a quiet refusal to do the obvious thing, rose an enterprise that now reaches around the world under the name of someone who never existed at all. The man who never was built something that very much is, and it is still being built today. If this story made you look twice at the red-handled tool in your own garage, take a moment to turn it over and ask where it really came from and who truly stands behind it. If you enjoyed this journey from a single car boot to a global empire, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep bringing these forgotten and surprising stories of industry back to life. There are many more names out there, some fallen, some still standing, and every one of them is waiting to be told.